my background, my education is in molecular biophysics, and that's what I came here to do almost, 23 years ago, to do space station research, to look at the effects of microgravity on astronauts, so to try and understand the molecular mechanisms at play, specifically behind the muscle atrophy that astronauts deal with. In the over now 2 decades here, I've spent much of that time as more of a technologist and doing a lot of consulting around trying to understand the problems that need to be solved and trying to help government agencies and companies develop the tools to solve those problems. And that's been that is the topic of this symposium, is how we apply AI to solve today's problems. And in that, with that in mind, I'm going to try and tell you a very personal story, not because I like to tell it, but I think it lays the foundation, will help you understand the rest of what I'm going to talk about today, how I look at the problem space that we're going to be talking about, and understand the boundaries of that, and shape really how I look at the applications of AI and other technologies in that space. On October 2nd of 2013, I was, that morning, I didn't wake up. I had been up all night. I was going to a school hearing for my son. He had been expelled from school for streaking at a football game. And in the moments that passed, since that happened, that was all I could think about, was trying to figure out how, under those circumstances, how I was going to keep him in school. There were many pressures from all different directions, but that was my singular focus, was how to keep him in school, how to keep my job, how to keep all of the things working as a single parent. And so we went to the hearing that day, and it was about 2 o'clock that afternoon, and we went through, and it was the very best outcome that I could have hoped for. He was going to be put into alternative education, and the alternative ed school was about 30 miles from me, and that was a big concern, but we figured out a way that he was going to get transportation. And got it all worked out, and that helped me breathe a little easier. So that was all that was on my mind, was trying to make sure that happened. So we left, and I felt a huge sense of relief. I went home. I took that 45-minute drive back to home, and I had him call his probation officer, his juvenile probation officer, and I hugged him, and I heard him say, "Yes, sir, yes, sir," because that was part of the conditions for his probation. And I made myself a margarita, and I walked out, and I sat on the back patio, made a couple phone calls. And in that 25 minutes, I lost him to suicide. The moments and days that, next few days, it became a national story. I didn't see any of it. I heard whisperings of it. Obviously, I couldn't think very clearly about much of anything. But this was kind of the gist of the response. Like I said, this was national. Obviously, had, celebrities weighing in and putting the blame on the principal of Sparkman High School, where my son went to school, for the expulsion, and suggesting that that was the cause of his suicide. I spoke out in press conferences over those days. Again, not very clear-minded, but I spoke out to say that I didn't think that that was productive, that this line of this approach was a productive way to look at this. And that then got interpreted as there was a backlash, and for as I learned in researching for this talk, there were people who asked for Judd Apatow to provide an apology to the principal for that, and that was not at all what I had anticipated, and not all what I was trying to say. I didn't think that the principal, his decisions were very good, but at the same time, I didn't think that that decision played a large part in my son's suicide. And in interviews, I was asked invariably when I went on the news, to this day, the question comes up, why do I think he did it? And to this day, I don't think that's a good question. I don't think that's a reasonable question that provides any value. I think the more appropriate question is understanding why that choice was apparent to him as a solution to his situation. And I say that because I think the discussion around suicide prevention and the solutions are framed inappropriately. And we haven't seen a change. We've, in fact, seen an increase in suicide in this country and around the world since that time. I think the real problem space that we need to be looking at is what are those circumstances. That is the root cause of not only suicide, but a whole slew of other bad decisions to be made that affect all aspects of life in this country and humanity in general. And so I say that because that is the framework of what I'm going to or that lays the foundation for what I'm going to talk to you about now. So that those decisions that were presented to my son and so many others, where he chose the choice of suicide, that the apparatus that makes those decisions is the mind, and the health of the mind is crucial to making good decisions. And so this is the World Health Organization's definition of what mental health is. Mental health is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. I look at it kind of in this order. Coping with stress obviously is a crucial capability. To learn well and work well is essential for our survival and adaptability. To realize our abilities is kind of what we're really driving at. And as has been made so apparent through COVID, with the loneliness epidemic, connection and contribution to the community is ultimately what we should be striving for. So these next two slides are to kind of give some perspective. And I said that suicide prevention shouldn't be the focus. And I want to try and start to point to that a little bit. So 1 in 8 people live with a mental health condition. Now, what a mental health condition is a matter of discussion. In the United States, that is 1 in 5, as we have categorized that. Depression affects 280 million people worldwide. Depression in this country is about 8% of the population. And anxiety affects about 300 million worldwide. In this country, it's about 20% of the population. So over 700,000 suicides. That is one metric to indicate an indication of our world mental health. 70 to 90% of people with mental health disorders worldwide don't receive treatment. It's about 50% in this country. 50% of untreated cases in high-income countries are due to stigma. Okay, and so that's why we hear a lot of discussion about stigma. But framing that and appropriately talking about it. Talking about it is different from acting on things that actually affect change. Economic cost, $1 trillion estimated annually. See a 4-to-1 return on investment in economic benefit. $193 billion in productivity loss estimated in the U.S. And we see evidence that community mental health programs decrease crime and recidivism by 20%. Now, all of these are good metrics, but none of them points to a lever to change anything. I mean, they all have to be taken in context, and understanding what that context is crucial. In the official start date of Little Orange Fish by the IRS, the 501c3 was founded 1 month and 7 days to the loss of my son. So November of 2013. And I spent all of my time thinking, thinking that I'd spent my career trying to help solve problems in a variety of areas, with astronauts in space, with actually worked a lot in education, and technologies across the energy sector, and all of that was looking at invariably trying to understand the problems that we're trying to solve and understand the systems that need to be built around to address those problems. So, based on that, the mission of Little Orange Fish, first and foremost, is to educate the public on what the value of mental health care. It's everybody's issue. Mental health is clearly, everybody's. We all have a mind, and the health of that mind is crucial. To raise awareness and understanding of the systems of care that we all depend on, and to help navigate those systems and to help bring access and bolster those systems where they need to be. And then advocate for greater availability and access to those, and increase the quality of care. So it's one of the things that is very clear is that we have, while we may have resources, they're not available to everybody, and they may not even be hitting the mark on what they need to be providing to the community. And so that is the third area that we are interested in. And ultimately, the vision is to ensure that every individual has access to the quality mental health care that we all deserve and should feel comfortable accessing when we need it. Have 4 programs, 4 program areas. The Feelings Are Real is that education arm. And so we provide education programs and curricula development and so forth. The Here For You program, which is that access and awareness arm. I have several projects. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of those today. Expressions, which is, as I said, that community connection piece is crucial. And Expressions is, we work with the arts community here to bring art into therapy and also bring it to the community for connection and to encourage resilience and self-expression. And then the Inner Defense Initiative, which I'll talk to you a little bit about a little bit later. And that is trying to understand really the biomolecular basis for post-traumatic stress. So in that first few months after I started Little Orange Fish, so late 2013, early 2014, was going back through all of, going through everything that we had been through for the previous year, trying to get access to, even just trying to understand what we needed. I mean, my son immediately, it was like overnight started with behavioral issues that were just not anything that was recognizably him. And this impacted every aspect of our family's lives, and it really dictated all of my daily decisions. I had to try and figure out how to get him to the care that I wasn't even sure what that care was, and then trying to navigate all of the paperwork, all of the bureaucracy, all of the, all of the things that just added friction to that process. And so what I sat down and did for hours and hours and hours was just wrote down everybody I could think of that that we interacted with that played any role in trying to in the care of and the well-being of my son. That and then because that's all I could think about, I thought about everybody else's use cases. I tried to think, change the situation to take a different path. And so I did this hours and hours, and I put together a spreadsheet and tried to categorize kind of some high-level categories of who the people in our communities are and what they provide to the health and well-being of each and every one of us. And so there's family, first and foremost, and how can a family, what things can empower a family to help take better care of the people inside that unit. And then, of course, the medical system, and looking at how information flows to those various practitioners inside of the medical system. And then, of course, education is crucial, and thinking about the teachers. They spend more time with our kids than anybody, and how do we facilitate the flow of the information that they understand about our children. And again, I want to be clear that this is not, that was where my starting point was. Little Orange Fish is geared towards mental health and care for everyone. Just education happens to be important for that demographic. And then social support systems, and of course policy and all of that, how that plays into everything. Of course, it all has to work together, and it doesn't work together very well, clearly. But how do we make improvements on that? And so then thinking about all of these, abstracting out another layer, trying to think about all of the systems involved that we, humanity, are at the center of. And of course, we've got the natural systems, biological systems and ecological systems. But all of the other systems are our mind, our mental health is at the center of every one of those systems. And so it is clear to me that mental health is not just another aspect of, on par with physical health. It is central, it is core to health. And how I message about that and how I tell that story, I've been trying to for 10 years and hopefully improving in getting that message across. But it becomes clear when you start to look at the systems that our mind is the only thing we've got. It is where all of our life experience occurs. And so trying to understand how the systems support that subjective experience for each and every one of us, and how that brings us together better as a community is the objective of Little Orange Fish. And so can see all of these systems. I interfaced with every one of these trying to get help for my son. And they all had some role, some impact, where there was some friction that got in the way to actually getting the help to my son that he needed. As I was thinking about these things in, like I said, early 2014, it was a very lonely place. I had a lot of support, but all of the thinking about this was done inside here. It was, and I was walking in a grocery store over here, Earth Fare, actually looking for a 6-pack of beer, and I heard, "Are you Daniel? Are you the Little Orange Fish guy?" And I said, "Yes, that's me." And it was a woman, Annie Brazil, who I work with to this day. But she asked me if I was interested in working with an organization, St. Vincent de Paul, and they had a program called Voices of the Poor. And she told me a little bit about it. They were largely working with, the impoverished and the homeless. But mental health was a key thing for them. And so we met. She convinced me that to meet with them, and that began the start of a relationship that continues to this day, to try and work together to understand what these systems of care are and how we better serve the people, how we bring those systems into some sort of way that not only makes them accessible, but makes them the community awareness and access, as I've mentioned before. This over here was the technology we used at that time, because the leader of the coalition, it was not the coalition at that point, but the guy who was driving this for the Voices of the Poor, a guy by the name of Mac Yates, who I'm still working with to this day, an older gentleman, and we sat in his office on his whiteboard and used this to great effect of trying to understand the best we could, and that was the level of understanding that we agreed was as good as it was going to get. And as I said, that technology served its purpose. And it's still the best technology when working with Mac to this day. I took that information at that time and was just trying to then map it to something that something simpler that was not so confusing to me. And so I broke it down into different kind of functional areas, and just kind of thinking similar to when I was mapping out on that spreadsheet, all of the providers and their roles and so on. Looking at the different processes that an individual has to go through. First, they have to understand that things could be better, that there is something that could be adjusted to make their experience better. Then they have to figure out some way to make it better, or what is going to make it better, or characterize what the problem is. And that's a whole other specialty. So the triage and the diagnostic, or just the characterization of the situation. And then that goes into, okay, are there provisions available for that individual to address those problems? And in most cases, there are some kind of good fits, but not everybody has access. And then so go through this cycle and go through this process. So each one of these boxes here is a whole system of systems. And so there are all kinds of people, and there's all kinds of policies, and there's all kinds of other things that go into making those systems work that aren't even related to what their ultimate purpose is. And that's where there's a lot of that friction is involved in the bureaucracy and those optimizing those systems for internal, just operational day-to-day. Most organizations have to spend at least as much time, particularly once they get to a certain size, trying to just stay alive. And sometimes their ultimate purpose gets watered down, or sometimes lost. So when we were going through that, we started to, from that whiteboard and that exercise, we started to identify we started to put some names to who those stakeholders were, and started knocking down doors, and this thing that we had turned into what became the North Alabama Mental Health Coalition. And it started by engagement with the police departments, with the hospital, with the mental health center, and we started meeting every second Tuesday, and we do to this day. This was 10 years ago that this started, every second Tuesday at Wellstone, and there are now regularly about 60 to 70 organizations represented, but participating in and out, there's well over 100. And so that includes all of the law enforcement departments locally. Actually, Madison Fire Chief is there regularly. HIMSI Chief is there invariably. Got, of course, United Way, got all of the VA. So got a really good organization. We meet once a month, and while it's amazing to have everybody there at the table once a month, very enthusiastic, trying to coordinate and actually get actionable things done becomes exponentially harder the more you add to that. And I tried for the last 10 years, all kinds of technologies, all kinds of approaches to manage that coordination, and it's been very frustrating. One of the things that we do have that has been consistent for a decade now is Annie Brazil, the one who approached me at Earth Fair, is the minutes taker. And she does a fantastic job of capturing everything that was said in those meetings. And so I manage the website for the coalition, and I put all of those minutes up on the website. And so I wanted to, with the emergence of ChatGPT, I decided, hey, can we use this as another attempt to coordinate efforts? And so what I did was I created a GPT just out of the box that manages all of those minutes. It has all of those minutes there, and the instructions are to really provide anybody. You can go to, I'll show you the link here in a minute, you can go to it on your phone, to go there and you can learn all there is to know about the coalition, and you can use it to search all of the minutes, and I'll show you that here in just a second. And this is the link right here. This is, if you go to North Alabama Mental Health Coalition.org, you'll see, and go to Stay Informed on that page, you'll see this, you'll see the minutes. They're all there since 2022. And that link up there in the top of that paragraph is that GPT, or at least instructions to that GPT and how to use it. And from there, you can learn everything there is to know about the goings-on in those monthly meetings. So we only meet, as I've said to them, month after month, year after year, we're only meeting 12 hours a year. That's not enough time to get things done. How do we coordinate better to get things done? And so this has helped to some extent to getting people to review and realize that we've been talking about some of the same things and have made no progress year after year. But just want to go through, this is some screenshots from a chat through this. So summarize all CIT discussions in 2024 and any search for any related local or state policies or legislation. Terrible sentence, but put that in. And what CIT is Crisis Intervention Team Training. And so it comes back with, in August, Chad Brooks, Madison County Sheriff's Office, and Johnny Hollingsworth, who runs the CIT program for the state, they spoke on emphasis for integrating mental health care into law enforcement and correctional systems. And then there was, on the related legislation and policy, Alabama is actively expanding CIT programs to include hubs across the state for crisis intervention outside jails and ERs. And so, worked amazingly well. And of course, this is, you can use it for a variety of outputs, and you can go there to learn about Alabama law as it applies to, and local policies as it applies to mental health. And this is an easy automated report. I just asked it to give a table of, in fact, there's a button on there, I believe, to generate a table with this information. And of course, so topics discussed on the date, who said it, and what actions or decisions. And these were not explicitly stated actions in these meetings because we're not that organized, but the GPT does a pretty good job about identifying language that indicates who said what and who committed to what. And again, this is one format, but it's easy enough to add all of that other information. If you want to look at what news stories were running concurrently at the time, this GPT does a pretty good job of managing that. One thing that is a word of caution and a lesson learned when I was putting this together. Put it together in really the idea. I just wanted to see if it would work, if I could feed it the minutes and it would come back with useful information. And I did, and I was just blown away. It was like magic. And I think that's a common feeling. It feels like, okay, this thing gets me. It knows what I want. And so I did tested it out with giving it a month of minutes, and then I wanted to work towards a full 3-year report to give to the coalition. Kind of in something in this format, but I also wanted to do a slightly summarized paragraph structure. And so I started doing one at a time, and then that got a little tedious, and so I said, hey, maybe I can do it in batches. And so I gave it a year, and sure enough, it gave great summaries of 2022, 2023, and then where I was at 2024. I got it all done, and I was like, this is great. The coalition's this is going to be so useful. And I started looking through it, and one of the things I realized is I talk a lot at the coalitions because my name comes up repeatedly. And then I saw another thing that I talked about at a coalition meeting in, I think it was April of 2022, that I had completely forgotten about. It didn't look familiar to me at all. And I thought, wow, those are some good ideas. Why didn't I do anything with that? And then went on, and then I saw another thing that I didn't have any recollection of. We didn't have any meetings those months. That's what it turned out to be. It completely fabricated everything that happened in those meetings. Because in the prompt, what I asked it to do was generate monthly summaries for and it didn't, it's not human. It did what I asked it to do. And so that was a very healthy lesson that I learned from that. And so, that said, when you go to use this, and I recommend checking it out because it's pretty cool that it does this well. It is still frustrating that it is not perfect. It is close to it, but it still gives you not that kind of hallucinated information, but it's not always as thorough or as accurate at giving you the precise information that you're asking for, and so you have to work at it a little bit. But it's obviously well ahead of where we were, and so it's a hugely useful tool. One of the topics that frequently comes up in the coalition is a matter of homelessness, and how do we manage that part of our community to make sure that they're getting the care that they need, and also all of the other impacts that part of our community has on the rest of the community. And understanding that situation is difficult. That's why it's such a problem all over, and a growing problem here in Huntsville. On this was a technology that I used, which was me sitting down, again, just making stuff up, but it was my attempt at a causal loop analysis to try and understand what stands between the homeless person and optimal well-being. And so these are all of the factors that came out of my mind. So now the social connection, basic needs, health, feeling of safety, shelter security, food security are what are defined by the World Health Organization as the social determinants. And so that was my starting point, trying to see how all of these things play together. Of course, this was just me not knowing anything about social work or how these things work, but just ideating over this. I wanted to see if there was any way we could use technology to better support our understanding of the homeless situation and better serve those individuals in our community. World Health Organization defines social determinants as the conditions in which people are born, grow, work, live, and age, and the wider set of forces and systems shaping the conditions of daily life. And so I wanted to see if there was a way that we could use AI, similar to what I did with the coalition minutes, and analyze conversations and policy documents and everything related to the homeless situation, the homeless problem, and see if we can get some more better understanding, and so we can better serve that population. And so I created another GPT right out of the box using the same method I did before, that takes the input, and now what I did with this one that was different, rather than feeding it the minutes, in its instructions, I gave it definitions for the social determinants and sub-determinants. So there was about 30 things that I assigned to code, and I'll try to explain what those codes, why I collected those codes momentarily. But so capture basically the topic areas of a conversation and summarize it and then identify where these social determinants are at play, and then kind of generate that causal analysis that I was struggling at, doing out of my own head, and then provide a structured output that is useful and to hopefully provide guidance to that individual. And as I mentioned, with the indexing of those social determinants, being able to put that into a database, and that way we can one, help the individual and meet them where they're at, but also develop a kind of a needs assessment from the, a grassroots needs assessment rather than a top-down, talking to the providers, because we need to get that lived experience if we're going to understand really what our community, the people in our community are experiencing. And so this is a test case based on a real interview, a completely unstructured interview. I grabbed one off of YouTube, and it provided this summary from that. Interview focuses on a 34-year-old homeless woman, had housing issues, boyfriend problems, trying to figure out, like we all, just trying to figure out where she wanted to be, childhood sexual abuse, traumas associated, age 10, and then, kind of a current assessment of where she is in terms of where she spends her time. And this is just the top part of the kind of causal analysis. But as I mentioned before, those social determinants, this identifies where those social determinants are at play just from that unstructured interview. And then tells you where from the transcript that it's identifying these things or points to that. Again, this is fantastic, and it's hugely useful. Where we're trying to go with this is, one, trying to improve it so it doesn't make certain mistakes, so it's better at identifying and specifying those social determinants. But also expanding it to include, and I've got some prototypes of this as well, to include diagnostic criteria. And then ideally one day provide very specific guidance on where that person can go. So this is addressing an issue that, like I said, has come up repeatedly for 10 years in the coalition, specifically from the HIMSI chief. He has asked time and time, and month after month, he calls it his recipe. He says, I need to know how to help these people, where to take them, because right now, the police department is the only place to go. And there has been some progress in that, but it's still, the barriers are just, it's impossible for most in that community to get the help they need, because they might not have an ID, which has a whole process in and of itself. They might not want to, just a whole slew of reasons. And trying to understand those is what we can get to, I think, using a well-considered, well-developed AI implementation. Now I want to move on to kind of the cornerstone project of Little Orange Fish in terms of trying to help navigate the systems of care. I work for Cohesion Force, and back in 2015, Cohesion Force works largely in the defense sector, providing a variety of tools for defense programs. But knowledge management is an area where we spend a lot of time, and that is how to take information and make it actionable. That's my definition of knowledge management. And so we were working with natural language tools at the time to help really for discovery purposes and association of information inside of data repositories, and to try and sort that out to again, make it something that provides utility in making decisions and acting on those decisions. So I started developing this this concept of a tool that manages all of those systems of care, not just the clinicians and medical providers, but transportation services, education, all of the things that were on that that spreadsheet and more, and using artificial intelligence on kind of the back end to help identify, aggregate, structure, and pull that into a form that can be navigable, but also on the front end, so the user, so it meets the user where they are in terms of helping them, one, understand what their needs are, and then giving them not just a pointer to where they need to go to get the help they need, but an actual playbook, right down the list of, you're going to go here, you're going to run into this because of your circumstances, so you need to go here to get an ID, you'll need to, and if you don't have the money, then here's an organization that can help offset those costs. That was kind of the vision. About 2 years ago, I was looking at trying to really pilot this and build it, since large language models came into the picture and really made that vision not only easier to achieve, but also much, much easier to communicate to the public to get. And so it was, so decided to try and focus on that homeless situation as the first use case. But then working with a research team out at UAH, the president of UAH asked me if I would consider looking at the autism and neurodiverse population as the use case for this. And he agreed to put up some in-kind resources and some dollars to address the problem. So that was the project that we undertook. And it was I think it was the right first step for a lot of reasons, because there was a great need there, but also because it illustrates a number of inequities and access issues in the systems of care, because by definition, autism spectrum disorder is represents a population that are off nominal in terms of their needs. So we began, the objective here was to look at how we could use these large language models and potentially enhance them with other methods to make them more effective, specifically to address some of those issues that I pointed out with just using ChatGPT out of the box. We needed to address those. This map over here is a heat map overlaid over the state of Alabama, and that shows the concentration of resources available for addressing the neurodiverse population. And you can see there's a lot of holes there. Over on the right is a mapping, and I can't remember what they each stand for, but it shows the disparities based on demographic across the state in access to these resources. So we developed a large language model. It did end up being, GPT was the language model that worked out best. But we worked with the Department of Mental Health, had a user from the Autism Services District 1, I think. Kelly Goff is her name, and you'll see her, well, maybe saw her on that previous slide. But we worked day to day with her, getting information about the calls she would get. And ultimately, we heard about it yesterday in a couple of the talks. We worked towards developing, for her specifically, a tool that would not replace her, but would augment her capability so she could focus on the things, on the people things that she needed to focus on. And so that was our objective, was to build a tool for her that she could replace her current workflow, which was get a phone call from somebody looking for help, looking through a bunch of Word documents, spreadsheets, trying to find the right resource. I mean, it's not surprising that, you know, state program is stuck in the 90s as far as their workflow, but we took all of that and aggregated it, built a repository around that, and used that to integrate a RAG, a retrieval augmented generative front end. So, and what that is essentially a repository that the language model that filters a response through, so it makes it more domain specific. And what we were able to do is compared a variety of large language models that were RAG enhanced. And of course it outperformed traditional natural language processing and standard, all of the large language models out of the box. And got a 92% accuracy for geographically specific queries. Now that's, when we're talking about people and giving advice, we need to make that number better. I mean, that's you know, a 8 or 9% likelihood of getting bad advice is not acceptable when you're trying to work with people. Again, for the purposes with Kelly, and it's now being tested, piloted with several other of the autism coordinators across the state. That's pretty good, because that removes a lot of workload. And again, allows her and them to get back to actually working with the people and doing the peopling that needs to be done, and spending less time in the mundane, you know, digging through data, which is what AI is very good for. And again, in this started out as a geospatial project. That was where we originally conceived it. And we saw unsurprising numbers that there are disparities of in service for regions with poverty rates greater than 19% and minority populations greater than 20%. There are huge disparities. This tool actually was really helpful in helping to get those, identify resources that could be made available from other regions to those populations. So that was a big success. Yeah, and that was the real impact of this, is it increased the timely access to these resources. And that's a crucial thing that I don't think I've mentioned enough. Time is critical. I mean, when somebody is, you know, particularly when that stigma thing comes in, you try and get somebody to get to care, and if they are not, I mean, if they're reluctant in any way, apprehensive about it in any way. They'll look for any excuse not to go. That's just, I think that's all of us, because it's scary. So timeliness is crucial. Moving down a level in kind of the systems that we're talking about, actually a couple of levels. In 2010, there was a shooting at UAH and in the biology department. Dr. Joe Ng was in that room, and Joe was the first scientist I worked on doing some of the space station research. He and I are both biophysicists, and so we worked together closely. I knew everybody in that room. 3 people died that day. 2 I was good friends with. And Joe was part of the intervention that ended that day. And he made the observation that there was all of the survivors of that, and that included the secondary, the people who weren't even in that room. I know it affected me, and all of the close family and friends, of course. And he made an observation that there was something that some people recovered better than others. And so this resiliency thing was interesting to him. And so he did a pilot study with some veterans back in 2012 to look 11 of whom had PTSD, and was looking for a blood marker that would distinguish those, and he found one that was indicated. So we partnered up and started the Interdefense Initiative around those results, trying to understand what was going on there. And kind of the key question, what it came down to, is only 15% of veterans of wars, 15% suffer from post-traumatic stress coming from that. It's 8% of the general population. And so it's not just a wartime thing. Post-traumatic stress is a much broader issue. What the diagnostic criteria are all subjective, like everything in the diagnostic criteria, with the exception of you have to have a exposure to some life-threatening or similarly traumatic event. But it's the recurring thoughts, the nightmares are what we understand post-traumatic stress to be. The idea here, one of the things we were looking for is, can we find a blood-based marker that will give us a more objective test for sufferers of post-traumatic stress? And then also try to understand why it is that only 10 to 20% of people who are exposed to trauma and 80% or more of all of us will be exposed to similar traumas. So trying to understand this from a biological perspective was what the Interdefense Initiative was about. And so what he found in that pilot study, and what we are continuing to work on, and he's working on, he has a company called I Express Genes that is working on a toolkit, a blood test that can be used ultimately at home is the target to identify, your vulnerability and your susceptibility and your potential diagnosis of post-traumatic stress. But what he found in that study was that there was part of the adaptive immune system. So that's where your antibodies and that is these T cells and are the part of your adaptive immune system. And when I say adaptive, that means that they change based on things that come into infections. We learned a lot about it in the last 4 years. So the adaptive immune system is what takes care of all the foreign invaders. But that's understandable for foreign invaders. You know, when you get an infection, you would expect your adaptive immune system to come into play. Why are there changes in the adaptive immune system of a sufferer of post-traumatic stress? And so that was the initiation of the effort behind the Inner Defense Initiative. On my side, we have begun to explore, I've begun to explore that question, not the just what is going on, but I want to understand what the mechanism, why in the world, how this psychological trauma connects down to the molecular level to make physical changes in our body. And this is a key, it's as exemplary of my assertion that one, the feelings are real. You'll notice that that was the program name, but it is also that mental health is physical health. There is no other explanation for the things that we think and feel are all based in physiology. So we have been trying to understand what this connection might be, and so the approach that we have taken is to identify all of the genes that have been identified as associated with post-traumatic stress, and identify all of the genes that are associated with the inflammatory response. And why the inflammatory response? Because that is the innate immune system. That is the first step for when anything goes from a trauma or an infection. The innate immune system is the first, of course, and that is the same in everybody. Given individual, save individual differences, but and so the approach that we've taken is to take all of these genes and and put them into a graph map, a graph database, and we have over 60,000 nodes. Those nodes are simply just identification of the gene and some attributes associated with it. The protein associated with that gene also makes up another node, and so that is what genes do. They code for proteins. But the intermediate of that is a transcript. It's RNA. Also got those in the database. And why that's important, RNA is what Joe tested for, because that tells you, RNA in the system tells you what is active in your body at the time. And did that for all of the genes that have been identified as associated with post-traumatic stress, and then all of the genes that have been associated with inflammation, and put those into a database as nodes, and then associated all the associations with what are called edge lines that tell how those things may interact. And the idea here is that when we have all of that in place, we can start to see things using network analysis and other graph mathematics to understand, maybe start to see things that we didn't see before, and start to hypothesize, drive hypotheses, so things that warrant further investigation. And so what we found in this initial mapping is that 558 genes are linked to both post-traumatic stress and inflammation. So that's a good starting point for this. And then 11 of those genes, by this statistical measure, are very strongly linked. And so that is a starting point. There were also a number of other diseases that came out of this, and those have also now been incorporated into the map as we look at all of the diseases that are associated with each of these genes. We can start to understand the maybe some relationships between one of the observations that Joe made initially also was that seemed to be a high correlation, and this has been proven out in the decade since then, that there is a very high correlation association with autoimmune disorders and post-traumatic stress. And so we can start to sort out some of these things. One of the interesting things, probably means nothing, but it was a fun find, is that one of these 11 genes, and I can't remember which one it was, is associated with height. So, it's probably nothing there, but it was an interesting tidbit. So, where are we going to try and go with this now? Going to use AI, probably large language model. That's what we're looking at right now. That is RAG enhanced to not only similar to the resource mapping, but help shape what these maps look like, what that attribution that goes on each of those nodes, how those things are connected, help use it for the discovery side, but also on the front end side, so navigating this map, we can use AI tools to help in a natural language way navigate and ask questions to this. And so lastly, I want to say that all of this work was done by our all-volunteer organization. So all of this was funded by people in the community, save the in-kind and funding from UAH for the Autism Project. We couldn't do it without this community. And so Danielle Adamek, my daughter, Tracy DeBerry, Krista Moulton, Paula Phillips, Leslie Wood are on this every day. We all have other jobs, but I'm confident that they all too wake up every morning and thinking about the problems that we're discussing. And then our board of directors, Jeremy Blair, who is the CEO of Wellstone, Jeff Irons, who is a fantastic philanthropist in the community, and John Schmidt, who is a retired Army pilot and is now the CEO of iExpress Genes. And then, of course, got to mention that Cohesion Force has put up with my distraction with this, and given a lot of support in developing and giving me help in thinking around how to solve these problems. So.
Hi, first of all, thank you for everything. It was a very nice presentation. So I am just wondering, the AI large language model that you're going to be using to help support people with like depression, anxiety, all that, who's the specified end user? Is it going to be therapists, fellow students, friends, or would it be the actual person who has depression?
So, awesome question, because ultimately it will serve all of those use cases. And the vision is that this will be a tool that not only is for the user, primarily for the user, the person in need, but also the support of their caretakers, their physicians to help cross professional communication, and also for policymakers to start to understand, what's working and what's not.